Success is not something you chase. It's something you attract by the person you become. And the person you become begins with the conversations you have with yourself. Every morning, before the world gets a say, you must decide what you believe, what you expect, and who you are. Because your day doesn't start with your alarm. It starts with your mindset. I am responsible for my life is not just a statement, it is a decision. A line drawn in the sand where excuses end and growth begins. It means I no longer blame circumstances, people, or bad luck for where I stand. Today, because whether the past was fair or unfair, it is still mine to respond to. And in that response lies my power. When I accept responsibility, I take back control of my direction, my choices, my habits, and ultimately, my results that reminds me that success is not something handed over by chance, but something built deliberately through consistent action and disciplined thinking every morning. This thought grounds me. It tells me that I am the architect of my day, the one who decides how I will respond to challenges, how I will use my time, and how I will treat the opportunities placed in front of me instead of waiting for motivation. I create it. Instead of hoping for change, I become it. Responsibility also means I own my mistakes without hesitation, because every mistake carries a lesson, and every lesson carries the seed of improvement. I refuse to stay stuck in regret because responsibility shifts my focus from what went wrong to what I can do better. It gives me the courage to look at my weaknesses not as permanent flaws, but as areas. Under construction, it teaches me discipline because I understand that small actions repeated daily shape my future far more than occasional bursts of effort. It pushes me to develop habits that align with the life I want rather than the life I am trying to escape. It also strengthens my resilience because when I accept responsibility, I stop seeing obstacles as barriers and start seeing them as tests of my commitment. I become less reactive and more intentional, less driven by emotion and more guided by purpose. I realize that no one is coming to rescue me, and that realization is not depressing. It is empowering because it means I have everything I need to begin where I am with what I have. Responsibility also changes how I see success because I stop measuring it only by results and start valuing the process. I take pride in showing up, doing the work, and staying consistent even when progress feels slow. Because I know that growth is happening beneath the surface, I build confidence, not from empty affirmations, but from keeping the promises I make to myself and over time. That self-trust becomes unshakable when I say I am responsible for my life. I also acknowledge that my future is not fixed. It is flexible and shaped by my decisions today. It means I can learn new skills, change my mindset, improve my environment, and rewrite my story at any moment. This belief removes the fear of failure. Because failure is no longer the end, it is feedback. It becomes a stepping stone rather than a stopping point. And most importantly, responsibility brings clarity. It simplifies life because instead of focusing on what I cannot control, I focus entirely on what I can, my thoughts, my actions, my effort, my discipline, and my persistence. And in that clarity, I find direction. And in that direction, I find purpose. And in that purpose, I find the strength to move forward every single day without waiting for permission, without needing approval, and without making excuses, because at the end of the day, my life is my responsibility. And that is where my power truly begins. Today is full of opportunity, is more than a hopeful thought. It is a way of seeing the world that changes how I move through it. From the moment I open my eyes, I remind myself that this day is not ordinary. It is filled with chances waiting to be noticed, created, and acted upon. And the difference between those who grow and those who stay the same is not luck, but awareness, because opportunity rarely announces itself loudly. It often hides in small moments, quiet decisions, and simple actions that most people overlook. When I choose to believe that today is full of opportunity, I train my mind to stay alert to possibilities. Instead of problems, I begin to see every conversation as a chance to learn, every task as a chance to improve, and every challenge as a chance to prove something to myself instead of waiting for the perfect moment. I start to understand that the perfect moment is the one I am in right now. This mindset shifts me from passive to active, from hoping things will happen to making things happen. It reminds me that opportunity is not always comfortable. It often comes disguised as hard work, discipline, and persistence. And if I am not willing to embrace those things, I will miss what could have changed my life today. Being full of opportunity also means that I refuse to waste time complaining about what I do not have, because there is always something I can do with what I already possess. Whether it is my skills, my energy, my ideas, or my willingness to try again, I realize that progress does not come from waiting for ideal conditions, but from taking action despite imperfect circumstances. This thought gives me urgency, because I understand that today will never come again. The hours I spend now are either investments in my future or losses I cannot recover. And when I see time as an opportunity rather than something to be passed, I begin to treat it with respect. I become more intentional with my choices, more focused on what truly matters, and less distracted by things that do not move me forward. It also builds gratitude, because when I believe that today is full of opportunity, I start to appreciate the simple fact that I have another chance to grow, to improve, and to take a step closer to the person I want to become. Not everyone gets that chance, and remembering that fills me with a sense of responsibility to use this day wisely. Opportunity is not limited to big breakthroughs. T is found in the small, consistent actions that build momentum over time. It is in choosing to wake up early to work on my goals, in choosing to stay disciplined when I feel like giving up, in choosing to learn something new instead of staying comfortable. These small decisions compound and eventually create results that once seemed out of reach. When I hold on to the belief that today is full of opportunity, I stop fearing failure, because even failure becomes useful. It teaches me what does not work and brings me one step closer to what does. I stop seeing setbacks as dead ends and start seeing them as detours that still lead forward. This mindset keeps me moving, because I know that as long as I continue to act, I am still in the game. And as long as I am in the game, there is always another opportunity waiting just ahead. It reminds me that life does not reward hesitation. It rewards action. And the more I act, the more doors begin to open. Some opportunities will be obvious. Others will require effort to create. But they are all there for those who are willing to look for them and seize them without delay. And at the end of the day, when I reflect on how I used my time, I want to know that I did not let this day slip by unnoticed. I want to know that I recognized the value it held and did something with it, because today was never empty. It was always full of opportunity, and what I choose to do with it is entirely up to me. I will give my best effort is a commitment that separates intention from action and desire from results, because wanting success is common, but committing to effort is rare. And it is in that effort where real transformation takes place. Every morning when I remind myself that I will give my best effort, I set a standard for how I will approach everything in my day, not with half-hearted attempts or excuses, but with focused discipline and determination. This is not about perfect. Because perfection is unrealistic and often becomes an excuse to delay action. This is about showing up fully with what I have in this moment and pushing myself to do better than yesterday, regardless of the circumstances I may face. Effort is something completely within my control. I cannot always control outcomes. I cannot always control how others respond or what challenges arise, but I can always control how hard I try, how focused I remain, and how persistent I choose to be. And that is where my power lies. When I decide to give my best effort, I remove the option of doing the bare minimum. I stop negotiating with my comfort zone, and I start building a mindset that values growth over ease, because comfort rarely leads to progress, and effort is the price that must be paid for improvement. This commitment also builds discipline, because effort is not something I give only when I feel motivated. It's something I choose even when I do not feel like it, especially in those moments when it would be easier to quit or delay or settle for less, that is when effort matters the most, because those are the moments that define my character and shape my future. Every time I push through resistance, I strengthen my ability to stay consistent, and consistency is what turns small actions into meaningful results. Over time, giving my best effort also changes how I view challenges. Instead of seeing them as obstacles that slow me down, I begin to see them as opportunities to test my limits and expand my capabilities. I understand that growth requires discomfort, and that effort is the bridge between where I am and where I want to be. This mindset removes fear because I no longer focus on whether I will succeed or fail. I focus on whether I gave everything I could. And when I know that I have done my best, there is no regret, because effort brings peace of mind. It allows me to rest at the end of the day, knowing that I did not hold back or waste my potential. It also builds confidence, because confidence does not come from empty words or wishful thinking. It comes from repeated proof that I can rely on myself to show up and do the work, even when it is difficult, even when it is boring, and even when the results are not immediate. This kind of self-trust is powerful because it creates a foundation that cannot be shaken by temporary setbacks. When I say I will give my best effort, I also accept that effort is a daily practice, not a one-time decision. It requires constant renewal and conscious choice, because there will always be distractions, doubts, and reasons to do less. But I remind myself that every moment is an opportunity to either move closer to my goals or drift further away, and it is my effort that determines the direction I take. I begin to take pride, not just in achieving results, but in the process itself, in the hours of focused work, in the discipline of staying committed, and in the resilience of continuing despite difficulties, because I understand that success is built in those unseen moments where effort is applied consistently without applause or recognition. And over time, those moments accumulate and create outcomes that once seemed impossible. Giving my pride outcomes that once seemed impossible. Giving my pride. Best effort also means being honest with myself. It means recognizing when I am capable of more and choosing not to settle for less. It means raising my standards and holding myself accountable to them, because I know that my future will reflect the level of effort I am willing to invest today. And when I live by this principle, I no longer leave my potential unused. I no longer wonder what could have been, because I am actively becoming what I am capable of being, one effort at a time, one decision at a time, and one day at a time. I control my attitude is a powerful reminder that no matter what happens around me, there is one thing that always remains within my reach, and that is how I choose to respond. Because life will not always go according to my plans. People will disappoint, circumstances will shift, and challenges will appear without warning. But in the middle of all that uncertainty, my attitude becomes my anchor. It is the filter through which I see the world and the force that shapes my actions. When I decide that I control my attitude, I stop giving power to external situations, and I take ownership of my internal state. I understand that I may not control events, but I always control my reaction to them. And that reaction determines the direction of my day. And ultimately my life. This mindset frees me from being a victim of circumstances. Because instead of reacting impulsively or emotionally, I begin to respond with intention and awareness. I become more mindful of my thoughts, because I realize that attitude starts in the mind, with the stories I tell myself about what is happening. If I choose negative interpretations, I create frustration and limitation. But if I choose constructive perspectives, I create clarity and possibility. This does not mean ignoring reality or pretending everything is perfect. It means choosing a response that moves me forward instead of holding me back. Controlling my attitude also requires discipline, because it is easy to stay positive when things are going well. But the real test comes when things are difficult, when I feel tired, when progress is slow, or when results do not match my expectations. In those moments, I remind myself that my attitude is not something that should depend on convenience. It is something I must actively maintain. because a strong attitude allows me to stay focused on solutions. Rather than problems, it keeps me grounded when emotions try to take over. And LPs, me make better decisions, even under pressure. When I choose a positive and determined attitude, I become more resilient because I no longer allow temporary setbacks to define my journey. I begin to see challenges as part of the process rather than signs to stop. And that shift in perspective gives me the strength to continue even when it is uncomfortable. This principle also influences how I interact with others because my attitude is not just personal, it is contagious. The way I carry myself, the energy I bring into a room, and the way I respond to people all affect those around me. When I maintain a constructive attitude, I create better connections, stronger relationships, and more productive environments because people are naturally drawn to those who remain steady and solution-focused. Even in difficult situations, controlling my attitude also enhances my performance because when I stay focused, optimistic, and disciplined, I am able to think more clearly, act more effectively, and make better use of my time. I do not waste energy complaining or dwelling on what I cannot change. Instead, I direct my energy toward what I can improve and influence. And that shift increases my productivity and progress over time. I also build self-respect because I know that I am not controlled by my emotions or circumstances, but guided by my decisions, and that awareness strengthens my confidence and sense of control. When I say I control my attitude, I am also acknowledging that this is a daily choice, not a one-time decision, because every day presents new situations that test my mindset, and each moment gives me an opportunity to either reinforce or weaken this belief. I choose to reinforce it by being conscious of my reactions, by pausing before I respond, and by reminding myself that I have the ability to choose differently. If my first reaction is not aligned with who I want to become, this practice helps me grow because it turns challenges into training grounds for emotional strength and mental clarity. Over time, I become less reactive and more intentional, less driven by temporary feelings, and more guided by long-term purpose. And in doing so, I create a life that is not dictated by what happens to me, but shaped by how I choose to respond to it. Because at the core of it all, my attitude is my responsibility. And when I truly take control of it, I take control of my direction, my growth, and my future. I am growing every day is a belief that shifts my focus from immediate results to continuous improvement and reminds me that progress is not always loud, visible, or instant, but it is always happening when I stay committed to learning and evolving. Because growth is not defined by a single achievement or a dramatic breakthrough. It is built quietly through consistent effort, small adjustments, and repeated discipline. Every time I choose to learn something new, every time I reflect on my actions, and every time I push myself slightly beyond my comfort zone, I am growing, whether I see it immediately or not. This mindset keeps me patient because I understand that meaningful change takes time and that rushing the process often leads to frustration instead of fulfillment. When I remind myself that I am growing every day, I begin to value the journey. Rather than obsess over the destination, I start to notice improvements in my thinking, my habits, and my reactions, and those small improvements give me confidence that I am moving in the right direction, even when results are not yet visible. Growth also requires honesty, because I must be willing to recognize where I need to improve. Without letting it discourage me, I accept that I am a work in progress, and that every weakness I identify is simply an opportunity to get better. This removes the fear of imperfection, because I no longer expect myself to have everything figured out. I only expect myself to keep improving. This belief encourages me to stay curious, because growth thrives on learning, and learning requires an open mind. I seek new ideas, new perspectives, and new skills, because I understand that what got me here will not take me where I want to go. And by expanding my knowledge, I expand my possibilities. Growth also demands consistency, because occasional effort will not create lasting change. It is the daily commitment to show up to practice and to improve that builds momentum over time. Even when progress feels slow, I remind myself that consistency compounds and that each small step is contributing to something greater. This helps me stay disciplined Because I no longer rely on motivation alone. I rely on the habit of showing up and doing the work regardless of how I feel on a given day. This mindset also changes how I view challenges. Because instead of seeing them as setbacks, I begin to see them as necessary parts of the growth process. Every challenge teaches me something new about my abilities, my mindset, and my resilience. And with each lesson, I become stronger, more capable, and more prepared for what lies ahead. Failure no longer feels like an endpoint. It becomes feedback, a signal that there is something to learn and adjust. And this perspective allows me to keep moving forward without being held back by fear or doubt. When I say I am growing every day, I also recognize that growth is not limited to one area of my life. It applies to my mindset, my skills, my relationships, and my discipline. I become more intentional about how I spend my time because I want my daily actions to align with the person I am becoming. I choose activities that contribute to my development, and I become more aware of habits that hold me back. This awareness gives me control because I am no longer drifting through my days. I am actively shaping them in a way that supports my growth. Over time, I begin to trust the process because I see evidence that my efforts are paying off. Even if the results are gradual, I develop confidence, not from instant success, but from knowing that I am improving, that I am learning, and that I am moving forward one step at a time. This kind of confidence is steady and lasting because it is built on consistent action rather than temporary outcomes. And as I continue to grow, I also gain a deeper understanding of myself, my strengths, my values, and my purpose, which allows me to make better decisions and pursue goals that truly matter to me. At the end of the day, this belief reminds me that I am not defined by where I started or by the mistakes I have made. I am defined by my willingness to keep growing, to keep learning, and to keep becoming a better version of myself every single day. And that commitment to growth ensures that no matter where I am today, I am always moving towards something greater. I attract success. Through discipline is a principle that reminds me that success is not random and it is not reserved for a lucky few. It is the natural result of consistent actions guided by self-control and commitment, because discipline is what turns intentions into reality. It is the bridge between goals and achievements, and without it, even the best plans remain unfinished ideas. When I tell myself that I attract success through discipline, I shift my focus away from quick wins and instant gratification and toward long-term consistency and steady progress. I understand that success is not something I chase desperately. It is something I build quietly through the habits I practice every single day. Discipline begins with the small choices I make when no one is watching. The decision to wake up on time, the decision to stay focused on my work, the decision to follow through on what I started, even when it becomes difficult. These moments may seem insignificant on their own, but together they create a pattern, and that pattern shapes my results. Over time, this belief helps me develop control over my impulses, because I realize that every time I give in to distraction or delay, I move further away from the life I want, and every time I choose discipline, I move closer to it. It teaches me that discipline is not about restriction, it is about freedom, because when I can control my actions, I am no longer controlled by my moods, why fears, or my excuses. I become reliable to myself, and that reliability builds confidence, because I know that I can trust myself to do what needs to be done regardless of how I feel. Discipline also creates structure in my life. It gives my days direction and purpose, because instead of reacting to whatever comes my way, I follow a plan that aligns with my goals. I become more intentional with my time and more aware of how I spend my energy. This structure allows me to make steady progress, even when motivation fades, because discipline does not depend on feeling inspired. It depends on making a decision and sticking to it over and then over again. This mindset also changes how I view success, because I no longer see it as a distant destination, but as something that is being formed in my daily routine. I take pride in the process and the consistency. of my efforts. And in the discipline, I show even when results are not immediate because I understand that results are a delayed reflection of disciplined actions. This belief also strengthens my resilience because discipline requires me to continue even when things are not going my way. When I face setbacks or slow progress, I do not abandon my efforts. I adjust my approach and keep moving forward because I know that discipline is what separates temporary failure from lasting success. It keeps me grounded and focused on what I can control, my actions, my effort, and my persistence, rather than what I cannot control. Discipline also helps me eliminate excuses because when I am committed to my standards, I no longer look for reasons to avoid the work. I take responsibility for my actions and hold myself accountable to the commitments I have made. This level of accountability raises my standards and pushes me to operate at a higher level consistently. It also influences how others see me, because disciplined individuals are often trusted, respected, and relied upon. And that creates opportunities that may not have existed otherwise, but more importantly, it strengthens how I see myself. Because I know that I am becoming someone who follows through, who stays consistent, and who does not give up easily. When I say I attract success through discipline, I am reminding myself that success is not about doing something extraordinary once it is about doing the right things repeatedly with focus and determination. And over time, those repeated actions create momentum, and that momentum leads to results that once seemed out of reach. And as I continue to practice discipline, I realize that it is not a burden, but a tool that allows me to shape my life according to my goals and values. Because at the end of the day, success is not something that suddenly appears. It is something that is built step by step through disciplined choices made every single day. And when I commit to those choices, I naturally attract the success I am working toward.